June 6, 1998, we're at the 1998 Washington, D.C. KTA reunion, and I'm here with Dora Sklut. Dora, can you spell your name for me first?
Sure. It's D-O-R-A-S-K-L-U-T.
And is that your maiden name or your married name?
No, my maiden name was Kaplan.
And can you tell me when and where you were born?
I was born in 1924 in Wuppertal-Elberfeld, Germany.
And is that a large town or a city? Or
It was a medium-sized town.
And what did your parents do?
My father was a tailor.
And did you live in a house or an apartment?
We lived in an apartment. It was a large building, and it was the third floor, and there were living quarters in one end, and the other end was used as a workroom, large workroom, and there was an extra room where my father kept materials.
And was it just you and your mother and father, or were
I had two other brothers. One was older, 3 years older, and the other one was 8 years younger than I was.
And can you tell me the names of your parents and your brothers?
My mother's name was Abraham, my mother's name was Telka, and my older brother's name was Moritz, and my younger brother's name was Siegfried.
And where did you go to, was this a Jewish household, or?
Oh yes, yes, it was. My parents came from Poland, and they're quite religious. They came from a very religious family. In fact, my grandmother, who I went to see when I was 7 years old, we went to Poland, and she wore a sheitel. And my grandfather was very religious. He was teaching cheder, but I only saw them once.
Why is that?
My mother took us there. My mother took my older brother and me there, and we had never seen them before. I was 7, my brother was 10, of course, and my younger brother wasn't born at that time. And my father couldn't go back there because he was stateless. That means he ran away from Poland so he wouldn't go to the army. And he wouldn't fight for the Polish army, so he ran away to Germany. And my mother and he were married before they left Poland. And my older brother was born in Germany in 21. And when my younger brother was born in 1932, my older brother and my younger brother went to see the grandparents. And that was the only time and the last time we saw them. Because my father could never go back there since he was stateless. So he never saw his parents again. And he worked as a tailor in Wuppertal. And it was a large community of Polish Jews that came from Poland. They were all fairly religious. And they had their own temple. And we used to go there on high holidays. We kept kosher home. And until it was no longer possible to get kosher food. And then my mother made her own meat kosher by putting salt on the meat so the blood would run out. And we did the best we could.
And
yes.
Would you consider your family working class, middle class?
They always worked, my father worked very hard, and they made a good living, and we were always, we never need of anything. We always had what we needed. I think it was a better life for them in Germany than they had in Poland, so we were quite satisfied. And of course we were fortunate. My father always made us new coats from pieces that were left over from other cloths, and we had new coats for Passover and for my brother and I, both of us, 3 of us then. And no, I wasn't deprived of anything. I didn't feel I was.
And did you go to a Jewish school or a mixed?
No, we went to Cheder, we went to synagogue, we went to Cheder, and we learned Hebrew. And but other than that, we went to German school. We went to Jewish kindergarten until we started school. We went to German schools. And I had German girlfriends. I had Jewish girlfriends. And there was no problem at that time until 1930, what was it? Crystal now. 1930, what was it?
38.
38.
But you had no problems with when the Nuremberg laws were...
Oh, well, yes, they started, of course, but we didn't feel it. We were still young enough, we didn't know about it that much. And well, still we heard little bits and pieces here and there, stories, and we didn't pay too much attention. And I was too young to pay attention to it, and they kept it away from us, I don't know, until the signs came out on the stores where they said no Jews allowed to buy, you couldn't buy shoes anymore, and you couldn't, they were not allowed to go here and different places, and life became difficult. And but people always thought it couldn't last. It would go away somehow. So they said, okay, we're still working, we still have food, we still can do things, but they came gradually. So I guess that's why they waited till the very last minute. I was fortunate. My father left first. He went to Holland.
When?
He had relatives. It was when he found out that they were rounding up the Polish Jews. And of course he was stateless. They would have sent him to
to Spanien
to Auschwitz, probably.
No. If it was probably in the fall of '38, they were rounding up the Polish Jews and sending them over the border into Poland.
Or they might have sent him back there.
Yes.
But he managed to get, he used to go to Holland many times. We had relatives in Holland. So he thought the best way for him was to leave to Holland. But unfortunately, he was always a very well-dressed man. He used to make his own coats from camel hair, you know, with patched pockets. You remember those styles? And he made himself a beautiful coat, and he dressed well, and he went across the border by train, packed his suitcases, and he was going to send for my mother and us. But unfortunately, I think he was very conspicuous. At that time, people didn't dress that way. and they spotted him, and as he went across the border somehow, the Germans caught him, and they went to send him back to Germany on the Dutch border. I don't know, I don't remember which way he went, but when I met him later on, when I went to Holland myself, I met him for one day. This is very confusing. Sorry.
All right.
But I found out that I met him for one day before I left for England, and he told me that the Germans had sent him back, but he wouldn't go all the way back to Germany, and then he ran over again to the border to Holland, and then the Dutch caught him, and they put him in a camp, in prison actually, in Holland, because he didn't have the proper papers. So he was in prison in Holland. After he left, I was very scared, and every time we heard footsteps, one day some Germans came up to our apartment, and I heard the footsteps, you know, heavy footsteps, and I knew it was the Germans, and they were, each apartment was one level, the whole level of the house. And he rang our doorbell, and he asked to speak to Mr. Kaplan. And I heard him, and my mother said, "He's not here." And they wanted to know where he was. But I don't know what the answer was, but I was very frightened. Whatever she gave him, they left. Whatever answer that she gave him, they left. And after that, I said to my mother, "I want to leave. I'm frightened. I want to get out of here." I was about maybe 13, 14. And my mother made arrangements for me to go to Holland with a German woman. And this woman had a daughter my age, and I took the place as her daughter. They didn't need a photo in their passport at that time. So she told me, "Now your name is whatever it was, Mary, I forgot, and you were born on such and such a day. If the Germans ask you on the train, you say your name is Mary and you were born in such and such a date."
This was a non-Jewish woman.
Non-Jewish woman, a German woman. So of course I was nervous, but I thought the whole time I kept saying to myself, I hope I don't say May the 2nd, you know. But it went okay, and she took me over to my aunt in Holland, in Rotterdam. No, sorry, it was a long time ago. I never thought about it. This was in The Hague.
And do you remember what month or year this was?
Oh, it was several months before the war broke out. And my aunt in Holland, I had never met her before. I only knew my father used to go and visit her. But she herself had lots of children. And she was very nice to me, and she took me in. But her children, I think she was paid by the state for each child. She needed the money. They had a cigar store and no husband. Her husband had died, and she was trying to keep the children. And she was get so much money for her child, so she was afraid to keep another child because they would find out that she was getting money and she's keeping another child there. So she sent me to internment camp, a Dutch internment camp, because she couldn't keep me. And I was there, but at the same time, before I left, I was supposed to come out to England with a children's transport. But I didn't want to wait. I said, Mother, I have to get out. So the papers were being processed, but they weren't ready for me. And my brother, my older brother. So in the meantime, I was in Holland and in the camp. So one day, after a month or so, we had a Dutch woman come to the camp, and she would look to see if everything was okay, if we needed anything. It was a Red Cross lady. She worked for the Red Cross, and she had a son that was my age. And this boy came over, he talked to me, and he wanted to know what my story, what happened to me. And I told him that I was supposed to go to England, but I couldn't wait for the papers. And I was frightened, and I told him that I came out with a German woman, and I ended up here in the camp. He told his mother, and his mother arranged for my papers to come from Germany to Holland, so I could join the transport from Holland to England. And that's how I got out of Germany, alive. And in the meantime, my father was still in Holland, and she managed to get him out of prison just for one day, so I could see him before I left for England. And that was the last time I saw my father. And I wish I knew this lady's name. I can't remember, because she's the one that saved my life. And my mother, eventually, my father, the last letter I heard from him when he was in Belgium, he managed to get to Belgium. And he sent for my mother and for my younger brother. My mother would not let my younger brother go because she thought he was too young to be without a mother. And we were sent, actually, I lived with relatives in England. I wasn't found out to family, you know. I had family there. And my brother managed to come later on when the papers arrived. No, actually he went to England right after I went to Holland. If I would have waited, I still would have got out of Germany with him in time, but I just didn't know for sure. And my father ended up in Belgium with my mother and my younger brother. When Hitler came to Germany, the troops came there, and of course they were in Brussels, and they rounded up all the Jews in Brussels, and they were sent to Auschwitz, all three. And for years we searched after the war. We tried to find out through the Red Cross what happened to them. They didn't know, nobody knew anything. And they assumed that they died in the concentration camp. But my older brother, was always, he tried to find them, he looked, and any kind of way where he could find out something, and we never heard anything definite. But years later, when I traveled to Brussels, my husband and I, it's not too many years ago, as a matter of fact, we went to Brussels, and I had a letter from my father many, many years ago. The last letter I had was from Belgium. And it was, I remember the street, it was called Rue de Vienne. It was in a new Jewish area. So when I went to Brussels, I said to my husband, I would like to go to that street. The last address I had for my father was Rue de Vienne. I had even the number. So many years. I think it was 20 years after the war. And I went there, and I walked along the street because I didn't see anything. And then I came on, there was a name on the side of the shop, and it looked like it was a Jewish name. I was on the other side of the street, and I crossed over, and I talked to the man. I said, excuse me, I said, did this shop here, has it been for many years? He said, it depends how many years do you mean? And I said, well, before the war. He said, no, not before the war, but I was here. I'm from Poland, and I've been here right after the war. I came here and I opened up this shop. What are you looking for? I said, well, I told him the story. I said, my father's last address was on this street. I just wondered. So he said, come inside. You're Jewish? I said, yes, come inside. So he told me that the Germans rounded up all the Jewish people in Brussels, and they have a memorial in Brussels. I don't know if you know about it. From, the Germans were very good at keeping records, and they kept a record for all the Jews that were sent out from Brussels to Auschwitz. And he said they published a book in Brussels, and they've got the names from all those, like all the Jewish people. They even had the name of the transport that each person was on, and the one that were alive, which were not many, and everybody that was killed. And we looked through the books, and I found my mother and my father's name and my younger brother's name and the transport. And then he said, we have a memorial here. And I never knew about it. I've traveled to Brussels before. I never knew they had a memorial. He said, I will take you there. You'll never find it. They don't publish it. They don't want anybody to know about it. I didn't know. So he took me and my husband in a car to this memorial. It was like a half a circle, and it had all the names from the people that died in the concentration camp. And I looked, and there was my father's name, and on my mother's name, and the birth date, and for my brother's name and the birth date. So it couldn't be, somebody could be called Kaplan, but it was definitely the birthday, the name, and everything was correct. And I stumbled. I fell down, and like something struck me with the lightning, and he and my husband had to pick me up. It was a terrible experience, because until then I had hoped that they may be alive someplace. But no, this was a terrible experience. And actually, now I remember I was on my way to Israel, and when I got there, my eyes, they were bloodshot. I had, both eyes, they were red. It was just like a terrible experience. When I got there, and I was just in shock to see it. I knew that something happened, but there was always that hope there. And that was final. And then I knew that's where they were killed. 3 of them.
Back to England for a second. Did you and your older brother live together in England? Or?
Actually, I lived with, I had two sets of families there. One was quite well-to-do. He was a tailor, very kind man, and he was my father's cousin. And the other family lived in the East End of London, you know, which was poorer, and they struggled. But they were very nice. The well-to-do family were not so nice to me. My uncle was very nice, but I shouldn't say this maybe because I don't know where this tape is going. My aunt tolerated me. She kept me, but my other family in the East End of London were very kind to me, and they were a little more hard. And that's all I said. And as soon as I was old enough, well, actually, when I lived with them until I was old enough they sent me to school. I was going to school to learn English because I couldn't speak English, of course. And I went to, this was in Notting Hill Gate, and there was a Jewish school, Salomon Wolfson School. Couldn't speak English, but they sent me to school. And it was very hard. And my aunt was very active in the, there was a hostel on the street where she lived. She was well known. And she did a lot of good work for the boys. There was a boys' hostel. Everybody knew her. But I was happier with the other family in the East End.
So how did you go back and forth between them?
They both, well, first I went to, because one took my brother, and I went to the other one, and then the other one thought they would like to have the girl, and my brother went into the army, so it worked out okay. But let's see, there's something in between there I was trying to think about. Oh yes, I started work when I was living with my relatives in the East End. They were working for another uncle who also was a tailor, and they're trying to teach me the business, and I worked there with them. We took the bus down to the center of London every morning and come home by bus. And they were very crowded in there. It was a large family anyway, and 2 or 3 people had to sleep in one room, and that was okay. We managed. But, of course, then the war broke out. First, before that, I missed out something in between. When I was going to school, they sent the children to out of London. So we went to school in the country. In the country, they found me out with a Baptist family. Now, they had never seen Jewish people before. And they were nice people in their own way, but they didn't know any better. And the husband wanted to know what it was like. They thought, he really believed, this is not a joke, he thought Jews had horns. I couldn't understand. I said, do I look like I have horns? I thought he was joking. No, he actually believed that. And anyway, they wanted me to go to church with them, and I said, I can't, because My mother always told me, you must not set foot inside a church. All right, I have to do what my mother tells me. She's not with me now. At least I can respect her wishes. And they didn't have a regular minister. They only used to come, this minister used to come once a week on a Sunday. And I happened to be with a family that has the minister there every Sunday for dinner. And she felt very embarrassed because I wouldn't go to church with them. And I said, no, I was very stubborn. I can't go. So she said, well, if you can't stay in the house alone, so you have to wait for us till we come out of church outside. Well, the winters there were absolutely terrible, snow and cold. She locked me out of the house. And no other children, they were all inside. It was a small village. Most of them were related. She locked me out, and I was freezing. I was standing there in my coat and shivering, and it was so bad. And I was lonely. There was nobody out there except me and the snow. Well, I got very tired of this, and then, but other than that, they didn't mistreat me. They gave me food, and she was taking care of everything else, except he wanted me to go to help milk the cows. He wanted to show me how to milk the cows. I was living in a city in Germany. I've never even been to a farm. And I actually, to this day, I'm not used to being around animals. And my mother wouldn't have a dog in the house. I don't know why, but they thought my mother would never allow me to touch a cat because she said they carry germs. So that's the way I was brought up. And to this day, I won't touch a cat. I don't hate animals, but it's a funny thing, and I'm embarrassed about it at times, but what can I do? So the guy wants me to milk a cow, help him milk a cow. I wouldn't touch it. I can't do that. So he wasn't too pleased about it. I said, no, I don't want to go. And he would get up at 6 o'clock in the morning yet. Anyhow, I sound like a spoiled girl, but I wasn't ever spoiled, believe me. Anyway, that was my story in being evacuated. And then I asked them, please find me another. I went to my teacher in the country, and I said, please, you have to find me another place. I can't stay there anymore. She locks me out of the door, and I'm cold and freezing. So he found me another place to stay, and it was fine. I stayed there for some months, and before I went back to the other family in the East End, and from there, after I worked there till during the Blitz of London, and then when I was living there, their house was bombed. It was impossible to live in the house. They were living up with, they boarded up the windows, and they had their own problems. So I went and I heard about the Bloomsbury house in London from a friend of mine, and she said, you know, maybe if you ask them, they can find you a place to live. But I was already working, and most of the children went to the hostel. They were not working. And I said, I don't know what to do. So they told me I can stay in the hostel if I pay a certain amount of money, and that'd be okay. I was still under 21. So I moved in the hostel in
which hostel was it?
In Willesden Lane. And I went to work every day. Some went to school. There were a few that went to work. And it was very nice. It was, It was a big relief. I was on my own, and I didn't need anybody. I took care of myself, and that was fine for a while.
And where was your brother?
Well, my brother, I left out something else. Does that mess up the whole thing?
No, tell me what, now that you've remembered it.
While I was in school in the country with, the children were sent out, one day a policeman came in and he said to me, I have to go with him because I'm a German. From school they took me, and they took me to Bristol, which was close to the town where I was evacuated. And I had an uncle, it was a brother from my uncle in London, and from my aunt actually. And he found out about it, that they took me from school. And they rounded up all the Germans, and I was only 14 years old, 15 years, or maybe close to 15 at that time. And what do I know? I ran away from the Germans, and they rounded me up as a possible enemy because I was a German. And there was a whole lot of people. It was a former hospital, and I saw all these people there, and I was the youngest one there. And apparently my uncle had called in the meantime and told him about me. He must have had some kind of influence, and the policeman came and he said, look, you stay on one side, and all the others were sent to the Isle of Man, and he put me on the side, and I didn't have to go with them. So I escaped that one.
How were you there for a few days or hours?
No, it was many hours. It was many hours. It was probably a full day. It was one shock after another. No, I couldn't imagine why they would do that. But that's what happened to me. But when you asked me about my brother, that's how I remembered. When I went back to London, because I didn't want to stay in the country anymore, that's when I went back. My brother was gone. He was rounded up. Also, he had, because he was German, he was 17. He was 3 years older than I was. And because, so they thought he was, they rounded all the German Jews up at that time of a certain age because they thought he might be a spy. And so they sent him to the Isle of Man. He eventually joined the British Army and came back to England. And then he's now living in Canada, and he's the only one survivor, just he and I. My grandparents were killed in Poland, and everybody else there, family.
And what did you do after the war?
Well, I stayed in London. I lived in London for 14 years. When I was 21, I moved on my own from the hostel. It was I was always be grateful for the hostel. They were very good to us. It was run by a Jewish organization. And, it was very well run. And, we had 3 people, 4 people girls sleep in one room. It was a very nice hostel. I can't complain about it. Yes, it was so much better than living with family even.
Because it was other girls in a similar situation?
Yes, yes, and the lady that ran the hostel was very, very good, and everybody, we had our duties, and it was for a beautiful hostel, and we made many friends, and it was very nice. And And then when I was old enough, I got, those days girls didn't have apartments. In England, we rented rooms. And I moved to a very nice room, rather. It was small, but very clean and very nice and very reasonable. And I lived actually there for 7 years. Yes, and then I was 20, probably about 28, when my brother at that time was living in Canada, and they wanted people to go to Canada, you know, so I think the Canadian government paid for the trips. They wanted people to live there. So they paid for a trip, and I thought, good, I go and see my brother. And I stayed in Canada. I went there. And shortly after that, I was in Canada maybe 6 months, and I met my future husband.
Where in Canada?
In Canada.
No, where? What city?
In Toronto. And he was at the time he was not Jewish. Should I keep it quiet?
No, you should tell us, because that's interesting.
And he was Syrian, but a wonderful man and a wonderful family. And I guess, like they said before, I heard the other lady say, I lost my family, and they had a big family, and they were all wonderful to me. And they had many sisters. Oh gosh. And they accepted me all with open arms. And I can tell you, and there was a big family, and there was so many different religions in that family, and they all got along so beautifully. And my husband died many years ago, and I have 3 beautiful daughters, and I still keep in touch with the family, although I'm remarried now, and they accept my second husband, and my second husband is Jewish, and so everything worked out very well for me. My first husband was a very good father. I can't complain.
And what is the religious, did you raise your daughters to?
Well, we lived in a very small town, and there were only 2 families. And he had one son who was 8 years old when we married. And he was already Presbyterian. And there was a little question when we first married, and he asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, I don't really know. I said, David that was the boy, and he's already Presbyterian. And there was no synagogue in that little town. I think for some reason, if it would have been a boy, I would have felt very bad. I would want him to be bar mitzvah. But since it was girls, I thought maybe it wouldn't matter. And I raised, the 3 girls were raised Presbyterian, but I never changed my religion, and the girls used to go to church with my husband, and I would never go. And of course I would not allow to put up any pictures in the house, and they understood. Not when they were little, they would ask me, and I said, I'll tell you when you get older. But I must honestly say that there was never a problem. As a matter of fact, the minister in that little town. He was a Scottish minister. He tried for me to, he came to visit me and have tea with me on Sundays. He wanted to meet me and he wanted to know why I wouldn't go to church. And I explained to him, I said, I could never go to church because my mother said I must never set foot in a church, and that's the way I was raised. And you know what he said to me? I understand. I understand. And he still came to have tea with me, and he never asked me again to why I should go to church. And I thought that was pretty nice. And as far as there was never a question, there was never a problem with religion in all the years that we raised our girls.
Did your daughters ever ask you the story of where you were from and how?
I didn't talk about it. I didn't talk about it, really. As a matter of fact, I never even wanted to watch the movies about the Holocaust, but my husband... Is this on?
Yeah.
Is it off? On?
Let me, I'll pause.
I just thought, is it off?
No, it's on now. Do you want me to turn it off? Okay. All right. You were just saying how your daughters you didn't really talk about your past to your daughters.
Well, they were young, and they only wanted to know why I didn't want to go to church. And I said, well, it's not my religion. I told them a little bit. I told them my parents were killed in the Holocaust, and out of respect to my parents, I was born a Jew, and I always will be a Jew. I was raised that way, and there wasn't any question about it, and nobody complained. Only when the girls asked why I didn't go to church with them, that's when I told him. But not in too many details. They were still too young. But now they're older, they know a little bit more, not too many details, but they know.
How old are they now?
Oh, well, they're in their 40s, so they know. Yeah.
And now that you're married to a Jewish man,
yes.
Do you are you finding yourself more involved in Jewish life, or?
Oh, I was involved even before.
Mm-hmm.
Well, after my husband died, I joined B'nai B'rith, and I couldn't do that before. Because, no, not because of, he, in fact, no, he was very sympathetic, my first husband, because he was in the British Army, and, he was in the American Army, and he rescued the people from Auschwitz, some of them. So he was pretty angry about what he saw there, so he was very sympathetic. But no, they understand now, and in fact, more and more so. My children are not, nobody married a Jewish person, but I don't make restrictions because I was very happy in my marriage to their father, and I don't make restriction on them. If they're happy, it would make me happy if they would marry a Jewish person, but if they don't and they're happy, it's all right with me. I'm honest.
do you find yourself now thinking and speaking more about your past experiences or your childhood?
Probably. Well, the children are older and they're grown, and the grandchildren want to know. And actually, I've talked more to my grandchildren than I did with my daughters for some reason. I don't know why.
And why did you come? Are you still in Toronto? Are you still in Canada? Or
No,
where?
we live in Los Angeles.
And you met your second husband in Canada or in
LA.
So what brought you to LA?
Oh no, we moved to Los Angeles in '62 while I was still married.
And what made you come all the way from Los Angeles to Washington for a Kindertransport reunion?
Well, I belonged to it a few years ago. I joined the KTA. So,
why?
Well, I'm a kind, and my husband is interested in it, and we both thought it might be a good idea, and he enjoys it, and he's interested, and very interested in it. He was born here in the United States, my husband. He's not a kind. And we plan to go next year to London.
And are you still in touch with any of the girls from the hostel?
No.
Perhaps you'll meet some in London.
It's possible. It's not my age. I don't know. If they're still around, we're very lucky.
Is there anything else you'd like to
Well, I think,
tell us or tell your grandchildren? Or
yes, I think they'd be interested to hear about the story, and I would like them to know a little bit more. And I've often thought about it, and I've given them books, and I've given them tapes, and they know a lot about. I've taken them to temple and things like that. Taught them about Hanukkah, and they know.
And your daughters live close to you now, or?
No, nobody lives close. No. My oldest daughter used to live in LA, and now she lives in Portland, but she'll probably come back to LA. I have one daughter lives in Washington, state of Washington, and the other one lives in Portland also, the younger one. We go to see them when we can. And then I have, my husband has 5 daughters, 5 stepdaughters, and we go to see them too. So we're constantly traveling. We try to see them once a year, and they live all over the country. 2 of them live in New York, 1 in Boston, and 1 in Monterey. And 1 lives in South Carolina. So hope I didn't leave anybody else out.
And are you and your husband working now, or are you both retired?
Both retired.
Well, you look so young.
Well, thank you very much.
Okay, since it is getting on, if there's anything else you'd like to say, you can. Okay. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This has been nerve-wracking for me, but
I'm not.
I don't. It's very hard for me to talk about it, and I'm not a very good speaker.
You were a very good speaker. Thank you.